let me explain the whole meaning of getting worse. Through the custody process, a lot more alienation games were being played. He wouldn't pay child support. He would play games with that. He involved my ex husband and got my two other kids involved. They started to falsely accuse me of everything under the shining sun, anything you can think of. It was like um, one day my youngest son's father would accuse me of something, and then the next day my ex husband would accuse me of something. When before, me and my ex husband and I didn't have a problem, but somehow this guy had coerced and manipulated my ex husband to jump on track. And later I found out through witnesses testifying that they were only going to do this so they didn't have to pay child support. And their child support payments weren't even high. I think one was 360 and the other one was 700. It wasn't even high in the DC area. That's a very low child support payment, and they weren't even paying it regularly or anything else like that. But that was their whole meaning of doing this. So they shortly figured out that they couldn't get me to react legally or anything like that because I had a very good lawyer, John Whitbeck, and the lawyers caught on quickly what they were doing and would stop it. So then they turned to the children. At that time, I had um, children that were able to talk and speak and basically mimic anything that their parents would say or do in order to please that parent. So they started to use the kids to do their dirty work, and which I'm meaning is they would tell the kids what to say, and then they would bring the kids to the police or they bring the kids to social services and have them say things, which was horrible. Uh, I mean, to this day, my children are 19, 18, and 13 and still remember that trauma. It was horrible. I mean, for them, they didn't realize it at the moment. They just thought they were doing daddy a favor, or daddy would bribe them with a toy if they said something, or he would bribe them with ice cream or candy or games if they said stuff. And I think to this day, it's totally ruined the whole surprise outlook, and gifting and trusting anyone ever. I mean, it ruined their complete lack of trusting anyone. And I noticed a huge amount of psychological damage and depression in the kids growing up dealing with this sort of stuff and having all the legalities and the social services and the police involved and seeing their mother, you know, terrified. I think that played the biggest part on it. And back then they were too young to actually understand, but now that they're older, they do. Um, so things they would do when they were super stressed out when they were young was throwing up, wetting their pants, um, night terrors. They wouldn't eat. They got really skinny because they were so stressed, and they they didn't know where to turn. I mean, they were so anxiety driven and stress driven that they ended up not only doing it to whatever the parents said, but then they started doing it to other people because they felt like that was normal, to say things that weren't true about other people to get the same negative reaction because they felt like, well, dad gave me presents for it. Maybe that's what you're supposed to do. No. So that was the toughest. Once I realized that was going on, I got him directly into forensic psychology, Dr. Stacey Hoffman, and they stayed with her for years to try to counteract some of that stuff. And to this day, she still is involved in my case. So the things that I noticed the most was the children being torn between right and wrong. Um, I think the obstacle that um, hit them the most was being torn between parents, um, wondering why mom couldn't be around, or wondering why mom is so afraid, or wondering why dad is making mom so afraid, or wondering why um, they're constantly around police or constantly telling people things that they weren't so sure about, you know? Um, I'll give you an example. One weekend I was cooking with the kids. We made pancakes and bacon and eggs together. And they were so excited when they went to their dad's house. They said, "We made breakfast together. It was so wonderful." And shortly after that, the police showed up at my door, and they said that the kids were scarred to death by Grace. And I put them in an unsafe environment, which wasn't true. But anything I did, was used against me. And that's terrifying. It's terrifying. You constantly feel like everything you think you're doing right is wrong, and you constantly feel like someone's always watching you, and someone's always following you. And you get paranoid. You get paranoid. You have nightmares. You have anxiety attacks. You get sick a lot. I probably had over 40 urinary and bladder and kidney infections. I lost literally 60 pounds. I was like 110 at the time, which is, I look like a coat on a coat hanger. But I kept going. I kept going. I enrolled myself in college. I took advantage of the time to better myself. Um, and when I couldn't get up, my friends would come over and get me up. When I couldn't eat, my friends would drag me out to eat. They saved my life sometimes, because the grief was so bad sometimes, and the terrors were so bad sometimes. And I know my kids were feeling it too, because they were having the same symptoms I was having. Um, um, and they were so close to me, it was hard for them. And I think what was hardest for me was knowing they had no idea what was going on, and they were conflicted, and they couldn't voice what was going on because they were between two parents. I know I was lucky to find good counsel, because at this time my attorney became my best friend. He figured out what they were doing. They were trying to basically torture me to death to give up the kids so they could have full custody and get their way. And their way was a financial selfish need. It wasn't something they felt like the kids were in danger, or even though they used that as an example or anything else like that. It was basically they just didn't want to be responsible for their kids. They felt like using any tools and using the kids at pawns at any point would help them get their way, and they would use anything psychological towards the kids, telling them to say things, or telling them to accuse me of things, and actually asking them to take pictures or video. And a lot of times I did create a support group of people to look after me, because I was alone, and they would counteract these things. And there was many times where they said, why are you lying or not telling the truth about your mom? This is bad. And the kids would just say, well, our daddy made us do it. And it's at that point when you hear that, you hurt for your children. You hurt for them, because they're being put in that position that no child should have to be put in. And then they would, they still wouldn't get it. They were too little. And there were times when they would ask why, like, why is this going on? Why is daddy so angry with you? Why does he want us to hurt you? Or they started to figure it out, but me being the mother that I did, I'd be like, I think daddy is confused, or I think he thinks maybe he's doing something that he doesn't know he's doing. Maybe he needs help. Maybe we should help him and pray for him and stuff like that. I would make it into a positive thing and try to comfort them so they didn't feel so afraid or have so much um, bad insight that they would still see goodness in a bad situation. But I couldn't hide it all the time. I couldn't. I started suffering from um, post traumatic stress syndrome, even though I didn't know that what I was going through. I did. There was times where I was so afraid I couldn't even leave the house because so much had happened that I was terrified. And even though I was going to counseling and I had the best attorney, I think, I was still afraid because not only did I have my ex and constantly fear for my children's lives, I now knew that they were using the children against me. And that was the scariest of most because I was seeing the toll it was taking on the children, and it was taking a really bad toll. And I was afraid for my children too. So it was very interesting how the cases went. It took from 2009 to 2012 um, to rectify anything. So for my youngest son, it was 50-50 joint legal custody, week on, week off. And then for my other two, it was, I had full custody of them. Once the father realized that he wasn't getting anywhere after I'd been drugged through the system like hogtied and dragged in the dirt for many, many years, he gave up. He picked up and moved out of state and left the kids. He didn't talk to them for years. And then the youngest father, through discovery, I found out that he had been a heavy drug user and been in and out of jail. And a couple of the officers realized what he was doing, and they went to court with me too. And they testified on my behalf that this guy was purposely trying to get me in trouble on purpose. And they knew this guy because they had dealt with him in jail multiple times on other legalities and criminal things, that they would explain his type of narcissistic sociopathy tendencies and the things that he was doing. And they didn't think it was right. So, like I said before, a lot of angels and saints helped me along the way because they were able to put two and two together. And the judge did end up awarding me $14,000 for both men putting me through that. And I used it for legal fees, of course, but it no amount of money could rectify what was going on. No amount of money could rectify. I mean, my kids to this day have many, many scars. Many, many scars. I mean, they suffer a lot. They have post-traumatic stress, both of them. They have anxiety through the roof, both of them. They still have night terrors. They still cannot trust any parental figure. They trust me, but they're still on edge. They still, I think they feel at peace with me. I don't think the trust is there because there's so much bad mouthing, there's so much falsely accusing, there's so much your mother is horrible beat into their brains for so long. They still have that trigger, and it's easily triggered. I have to really watch myself and be very patient and be very calm and understanding with them everywhere in any situation. But I know I'm very optimistic. We're going to get through it. We will succeed, and they will have a successful life. Um, so, it. I guess what I'll start doing now is I'll tell you the tactics that was used against me and how I dealt with them, and why it is so important that something gets put into place where things like this isn't allotted to happen, would be the most beneficial to family courts.